The Legion Go came out right around October, November time of last year, and it was a very interesting release. It had so many cool and new interesting features that we've never seen before. Like the detachable controller is turning into like a gun mouse, which was some big part of their marketing. And it was just such a big and physically large device with a very beautiful display, which has been outclassed by some newer devices, but at the time was one of the best displays we could have on one of these mobile gaming devices. And in that time, has it aged? And as I've mentioned in some of my past videos on certain devices, for this sort of retrospective or 6 month later review, what have you, I'm relying on a family member of mine who owns this device and who I can gain long-term insight from. And, after having my own personal experiences with the device, though much briefer, but still having them over the last, 6 months or so. The device has aged remarkably well. The drivers are getting better each time they come out. Game compatibility isn't a problem because it's Windows, so you can basically boot any game you would want, which is pretty nice. Something that you don't necessarily get on the Steam Deck, especially if you're staying on SteamOS. The Legion Go is just a pretty interesting device. Over these last 6 months, he's used it for all sorts of applications. He's even replaced his primary PC, which is really cool because this thing can offer enough performance that you can fully replace your home desktop with it, especially if you're aided by an external GPU like his old Razer Core that he had lying around from a previous setup he had years ago. Plugged it into it, worked just fine because the Legion Go supports USB-C 4, which is sick. So he basically plunked this just Windows tablet with a big old fat RTX 3060 and was able to start gaming on the go and at home at a reasonably high refresh rate. It's crazy. And it's more and more these days that I see setups like this, and it's super interesting, and it has inspired me for a video next week. More about that later. In this time, the Legion Go has held up remarkably well to the rigors of my relative's daily life. He's taken it with him to work. He takes it with him whenever he leaves the house, and it holds up remarkably well. Battery life is not particularly great, especially if you're in the higher wattage profiles. You maybe get an hour and a half depending on the game you're playing, which isn't great, and it's much worse than any normal gaming laptop would have even, which is a pretty low bar to begin with. But he mitigates it by also carrying around a massive battery bank that supports 65 watt charging. So sure, that's one way to solve it. That's how I solved it with my Steam Deck. Some features that were really cool in the beginning that sort of wore off longer he had it was the being able to detach the controller and turn it into a mouse, a gun mouse sort of situation that you saw all over the advertisements for this device. And it just ended up being far more underwhelming and not quite as useful as you might have thought. In my head, I always thought the same thing, that why have both the gun mouse thing and a touchpad when you could just have one or the other? Because the mouse attachment thing for the controller is just an alternative sort of input device for when you're sitting down, and the touchpad I get is supposed to be more for when you're sitting up and playing, but it's not too hard just to quickly detach the controller, navigate like on your leg or an armrest or something, and quickly get the precision you need. So it's not necessarily something that I thought was all that useful, and it ended up being not that useful, considering most of the places he didn't ever really require the gun mouse attachment because he had the touchpad on the controller. So it just never came across to be all that useful, though it is a very interesting idea. Just ended up not being as necessary as we initially thought. The touchpads, though, have been fantastic. But he wishes he had one on each side like the Steam Deck. Having just the one on the right side is fine, but he would have preferred to have both. I've never used both personally, but I'm sure he has his reasons. Something that he and I both noticed that towards the end of those 6 months, it started to get a whole lot louder in terms of fan noise. And upon, popping off that back, it was severely clogged with dust. And we both suspect that that was partially because of everywhere he takes it and just being in a generally more dusty environment working in construction. So he takes it with him to the work site and plays on his lunch break. So it's not necessarily the best and ideal place to play with a Legion Go, but he's just a diehard gamer who needs to get that grind on. But after blowing out the cooling system and making sure that there wasn't any trapped dust or anything or anywhere like that, the temperatures went back down and the fan noise also went back down. It's still pretty loud, and it's one of the louder devices that I've encountered over the years, but it's not horrible. It's definitely not as bad as my old HP laptop that I used to make these videos on. That was horrendous. Some of my insights over the last few months of using and seeing the device around was that it did have an amazing display. The fact that it's such a high resolution panel and has such a high refresh rate, while never quite that useful in games, it was just a beautiful thing to look at. If you're just consuming content or playing an indie title, being able to crank those details, it was just a immaculate display and just a pure joy to use. After a while of using it, I did find it kind of uncomfortable in terms of the ergonomics department, and I sort of blame its more cubed shape in terms of where the handles are. Having that more sharp corner in the palm just didn't necessarily feel particularly comfortable, and having that nice rounded edge to it does help, but it wasn't quite as comfortable as something like the Steam Deck, which is perfectly rounded. It really cups into the hand quite nicely. This feels like you're still holding a brick, which isn't particularly great feeling to have. And he also agreed that it is kind of an uncomfortable device. And maybe at some point somebody would make alternative controllers that are a bit more ergonomic, like people have done with the Switch and stuff like that. So it'd be pretty cool to see if there are other companies out there making third-party controllers to replace these less ergonomic controllers that the Legion Go has. I don't know if Lenovo has made that sort of connection system proprietary and making it so that other people can't make third-party controllers, but it would be very interesting to see that if this controller will ever get a sort of new controller revision, which would be super cool to see. Something that I and this relative of mine spent most of our time playing in sort of a handheld mode. The tabletop mode, much like the Switch, neither of us really liked, because it's not that it couldn't get at a good enough angle where we could see the screen very good, but it just wasn't the most comfortable way to play. It was just playing with it in a normal handheld setup, just resting it on the table while playing it, not necessarily detaching the controllers and taking up a little bit more space that way. And that's fine. I didn't really do that with the Switch, but it's just nice to have that flexibility in case you just wanted to watch YouTube on it. With the Legion Go being as large as it is, it was a bit of a chore to travel with. I got to use it for a few weeks at a time, and it definitely was kind of a bore to travel with, especially if you have more than just the Legion Go with you when you're traveling. And it's definitely more of a backpack device if put into a case rather than just carrying around the Legion Go, which is kind of annoying in my opinion. And the Steam Deck is barely better than the Legion Go in that context, but it benefits of being a whole lot thinner, so you can get a more of a snugger case, so it makes it a whole lot more compact. But the Legion Go itself is just a erroneously large device, which is primarily the only thing that has aged poorly relative to all these other devices that I've taken a look at over these last few months. It is just such a large device, and it does have the power to back that up, which isn't why I haven't really talked about it much during this video. Performance is great. I talked about it in the ROG Ally video. They use the same SoC, so this can play just as many games as that one, just at a little bit of a higher wattage and at a little bit better FPS because of that. And being able to dock it at home with the full-fat RTX 3060, granted, it is limited to Thunderbolt 3 speeds because it's an old Razer core, and on top of that, it is going over Thunderbolt, so you're already cutting even more bandwidth off, so you're not necessarily gaining a whole lot of performance, but it's still better than the integrated graphics on the Z1 Extreme equipped devices. To summarize the video, the Legion Go has been an amazing device, and it has opened up whole new worlds of portable gaming. It has one of the most radical designs we've ever seen. I just can't wait and hope that Legion Go 2 might be just a little bit thinner. What are your thoughts? Are you interested in getting a Legion Go? I saw some sales going on recently for it. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear what you guys think down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.